Hello everyone, my name is Terry Callaghan and I want to tell you about the Arctic. I have been working there for 53 years and I love the place and I'm sad that it's changing, and I want you to all understand how it's changing and what is happening there. First of all, not many people have been to the Arctic, so where is it and what is it like there? Well, the Arctic has 8 countries. It has Russia all the way along this coastline here, Finland, this area here, Norway, which goes all the way down this coastline, and Sweden, which goes into the Arctic here, and it's down here. It has Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and Alaska. It's at the top of the world where the Arctic ends and the forests begin is a line which to me denotes where the Arctic is. But that line is becoming fuzzy, if you like, because the tree line is moving, the forest is moving into the Arctic. So we can't say that the Arctic has a really secure line or definition. Well, what is it like there? Well, during the winter, all the seas in the Arctic are frozen. So that means that people can walk across the sea on the ice. But in summer, a lot of the ice melts. On land, we have ice too. We have ice caps at the tops of the mountains in many areas, and the ice accumulates because of snowfall, and then that ice flows down the mountains as glaciers. And those glaciers flow to the sea in many cases, and when they hit the sea is warmer than the ice, so the ice melts and the ice breaks off and falls into the sea, forming icebergs, and often very beautiful icebergs. On land, we have something very strange that we don't have here in England. We have something called permafrost, and that permafrost causes patterns in the landscape. So this is like, if you like, a very big meadow in Britain, but it's all patterned into these polygons, different shapes. And that is caused by this but this phenomenon called permafrost. This is permanently frozen ground. So after we go down through the surface of the soil, we hit soil or rock that never thaws, even in the middle of hot summers. The surface of the Arctic is covered by vegetation, and that vegetation changes according to where we are. So if we start at the south of the Arctic, we have the boreal forest with lots of trees. As we move out into the tundra of the Arctic, we have a lot of shrubs, which get to about the height of a normal person. And then we go to what we call grass tundra or graminoid tundra. That's grass-like tundra with cotton grass. These white little flowers are cotton grass. And this is the true tundra. And between the boundary of the boreal forest and the tundra is the tree line. North of that tree line, we have low productivity, very few species, and very few people live. But if we look into the distance, there we have this boreal forest, and that's where people live, where we have a lot of species and a lot of productivity. The animals that live in the Arctic are very numerous and very many different types, from the wolves to moose, to bears, this is a European brown bear, and to the Arctic fox, the white fox. We have lots of reindeer in North America. They're called caribou, but it's more or less the same species. We have muskoxen, which is more characteristic of the Ice Age, a long time ago, but there's still a lot of muskoxen around. We have these little guys, the lemmings and other rodents and voles that form very large populations every 5 to 7 years. And we have what everyone knows now from Harry Potter, the snowy owl, which feeds on the lemmings. At sea, we have complicated food chains, but this, I'll show you a very simple one, that light from the sun is used to create energy in the form of carbohydrates and sugars from these simple one-celled algae. And those algae are eaten by fish. The fish are eaten by seals. And we have walruses as well. They don't eat the fish so much as to scrape clams off the bottom of the seabed. And then all these are eaten by polar bears. But polar bears are not the top predator. The top predator is us. And many of the Arctic peoples eat all these animals, including the parts of the polar bear. So who lives in the Arctic? What are the people, who are the people that live in the Arctic? Well, there are very many different types of people, different nationalities and different cultures. And here are just a few examples. These are Greenlanders, just coming out of a church in West Greenland. These are Hanti people who are reindeer herders living in Siberia, in the Yamal area, and just south of the Yamal. And they use reindeers for pulling sledges. And then we have Sami reindeer herders living in Norway, Finland, Sweden, and part of Russia. And this is one of their herds on a road in Finland. Their children also go to school, of course, but they learn different skills. Here are Sami children learning how to lasso antlers of a reindeer so that when they grow up, they can lasso reindeer to mark them to show who they belong to. Some aspects of the life of the Arctic peoples have not changed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And here is a Nenets family wearing fur clothes with the fur on the inside, living a very traditional life. How do they live? Well, they live in different types of houses and different types of buildings. Here is a very modern village in West Greenland, but how do you play football here? It's not very green, it's just a bare rock. So these people, they depend totally on the sea for their food, hunting whales, fish, and seals. This is another settlement in Greenland. Further north, there is a little bit of vegetation here, but not enough to grow food. It's far too cold to grow food. So again, they depend on hunting and fishing to live. Here is a hunter's house with skins of animals that they have hunted. They hunt them for food. They don't hunt them for pleasure. They hunt them because they need the food and they need the skins to provide clothing. Another type of house, this is much more modern, and this is a miner's house in the north of Siberia. But this gives you a good idea of the conditions that people live in when they live in the Arctic throughout the winter. So the next part of my talk is to tell you how the Arctic is changing. And the most important bit of information I can give you is the Arctic is warming up. It's warming dramatically. It's warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the world. And in some areas, even more than twice as fast, up to 4, or in one place, even 8 times faster. So if you don't really know whether your area is warming or not, if you go to the Arctic, there is absolutely no doubt about the warming. And this is a very recent study because it focuses on this place, Verkhoyansk, in eastern Siberia. And this has become famous now this year because in June, the temperature there was over 38 degrees Celsius. Now, we very rarely in Britain have those temperatures. That would be extreme for us, but this is in the Arctic. So it is an absolute record for the Arctic. What happens? Why are these events important? Well, they happen in both summer and winter. We have very hot events in summer. We have warm events in winter, in which the snow disappears, and they have big effects. So, for example, they kill reindeer because reindeer starve to death in the winter when they can't break through the ice that's formed when the snow melts, when it gets warm in winter. When it gets warm in winter, not only do the reindeer die because they're starving to death, but also plants are destroyed too. So all the brown vegetation here in northern Norway is caused by just a few warm days in the middle of the winter before this spring. When the vegetation dies, including dead trees, this is what happens. We have forest fires, and forest fires are increasing dramatically in Siberia. The picture here, which may puzzle you, that is a picture of the sun at midday. And the reason why it looks like that is because the smoke from some very big forest fires in Siberia traveled more than 1,200 kilometers, and the towns in the path of that smoke couldn't see the sun properly. They were totally immersed in smoke, and the sun looked like that. Another thing that is changing in the Arctic is that the permafrost that I explained to you, the permanently frozen ground, is thawing because the ground is getting warmer. What happens when the permafrost thaws? Well, if the ground has got a lot of frozen water in, that frozen water melts into freely flowing water, it flows away, and the ground subsides. When the ground sinks, this is what happens. Trees fall over, buildings fall down, roads break. But then there's a new phenomenon, a new thing that's happening, which has puzzled scientists for a long time. Some big mounds are forming in the permafrost areas because they're pushed up by gases that are being released under the surface. And then eventually these mounds explode. And when they explode, they form very big craters. And then these craters fill with water from the thawing permafrost. And this just shows you how big these craters are. You can get a boat into one of these craters. And here's someone climbing down the walls of a crater just to collect samples to see how much gas is there and to try to understand what happened when this crater exploded. As well as temperature changing, permafrost is changing, snow is also changing. The period, the duration of snow in winter is getting shorter and shorter. The growing season for plants is starting earlier. But in many places, the snow depth at one particular time in the winter is increasing. So this is what you have to do if you live in Siberia and you want to go to work in your car in the morning. You have to move more than 1 meter of snow from just one snowfall event. And this is what happens to your homes. You have to be careful because snow falls off the roof. Icicles can fall off the roof in the thaw, and it can be dangerous. And what about the animals? I just explained that animals have a problem in the winter. This is why they have to dig through the snow. This is a reindeer digging through the snow to find vegetation at the bottom. Now, this is healthy vegetation. But remember, I told you that it's getting warmer with events in the winter that are warm events that causes the snow to melt and then freeze again. When that happens, these plants are covered in ice and the poor reindeer can't get through to that vegetation to eat it. But this is a lucky reindeer. It's found good vegetation that's not covered by ice. Ice is also changing at sea. And here we have a photo of the North Pole. And remember, the North Pole is just an ocean, but is covered by ice. And in September, the ice covers the least amount of area because it's been melting at the edges during summer. And in September, it starts growing again as it freezes during autumn and winter. This is the area covered. This is Greenland, this is Alaska, and this is Siberia and Scandinavia. This is the area covered in September 1984. Now look what's happened. This is September 2016. We've lost something like 3 million square kilometers of sea ice. That has a big impact on the animals that depend on the sea ice for having their young, making a den, having their young, or for resting or for feeding. This is a big problem for things like polar bear and walrus. It's also a mixed message for people because now we can get ships around the Arctic, all around Siberia, where we couldn't do that before. We can get ships through the Northwest Passage where we couldn't do that before because the ice blocked the Northwest Passage. So people can travel around the Arctic on the sea far more easily now than they could before because of this warming and the loss of Arctic sea ice. What's happening to vegetation on land? Well, vegetation of the Arctic, as I've shown you, can be very open and should be very open in the tundra north of the tree line. But shrubs and trees are moving into the tundra. Here you see some recent trees that have moved in, and here you see reindeer struggling with shrubs and trees that have moved into their area of what that was open grazing. In the past, tundra areas like this, with an individual tree there, were protected from trees growing into their area because the trees were very cold. This is a very clever thermal image of vegetation. All the reds and yellows are relatively warm vegetation in winter, which is very low down. But as soon as you have a tree in the past, which was there, then that tree was very, very cold. So here you see the temperature of that tree is minus 15 degrees, and that causes problems for the trees to survive in those low temperatures. But because the temperatures are increasing, then we have more trees in these areas. It's a problem for reindeer, it's a problem for people, because the reindeer are hunted by bears and wolves, and these predators can hide behind the trees, where the reindeer here can see every predator and can escape from them. When there are trees here, they can't escape. And also the people that manage the reindeer, they can't see the reindeer, they get lost. In terms of the animal species, the animals are moving north too. It's not just trees that are moving north. In the Arctic, we are used to the Arctic fox, the beautiful white fox that turns white color in the winter. Now what is happening is other species are moving in, like the red fox. This isn't an Arctic fox, but because it's getting warmer, the Arctic fox is moving into the territory. Sorry, the red fox is moving into the territory of the Arctic fox. We have other species moving north as well. The magpie, very common in this country, is also moving into the north because there's more food there for it now as reindeers die, and also it's warmer. Now I've told you what is happening in the Arctic, I want to tell you how some of those changes in the Arctic are caused by us. I want to talk about how we are affecting the Arctic. We're not very kind to the Arctic, and we're not very kind to our environment in general. One thing that has been recognized recently is that we are getting rid of a lot of plastic waste that is accumulating throughout the world, but it's not free of plastic in the Arctic. There is more plastic from where we live getting to the Arctic than we could possibly imagine. We are also using resources and extracting resources from the tundra, from the seas and from the land. And this is an example of a gas installation in Siberia in the middle of this beautiful tundra landscape, which is exporting gas to be burnt as a fossil fuel that releases carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas that makes it even warmer. We also create pollution that affects the snow and ice. The bottom right picture should not frighten you, but it frightened me because I experienced pollution like this from England. This is a photo from Manchester in the 1950s, and I lived through this period. I saw pollution like this. Now we don't have such bad pollution, but we still do have pollution. All the dots on this map are dirty industries releasing pollution. The clouds you see here going all the way up into the Arctic are levels of pollution. They're reaching Spitsbergen or Svalbard, they're reaching the Scandinavian Arctic, and they're even getting as far north as the northeast coast of Greenland. This is soot and other pollutants that go up to the Arctic and come to rest on the Arctic landscape and on the snow there. Another change in the Arctic is that the sea levels are rising. And that, of course, doesn't stay in the Arctic. The causes are in the Arctic, but it affects sea level for the rest of the world too. Why are the sea levels rising? Well, it's because the glaciers, the ice on land is melting. Here you see 1941. All that ice now has melted. This is glacier ice coming from the land. So this is snow that falls on the land and comes into the sea. But now that has melted and contributed to sea level rise. Even on the massive Greenland ice sheet, we have runoff of rivers, we even have waterfalls that is taking water off the Greenland ice sheet onto land. We expect that the sea level rise, due to causes like this, as well as the water getting warmer and expanding, will actually lead to about a half-meter increase in sea level in the next 50 years, and maybe a 1 meter sea level rise in 100 years. And this is what would happen in areas like Bangladesh, where there are people living along the coastlines, along the rivers. And these are areas of land that would disappear under the sea. Now, we all know about the coastal areas. What we don't think about is how far inland that effect goes. So just look, this is a huge river, and even way inland, we have areas that will be flooded because of the sea level rise. The next part of the talk is about how the changing Arctic affects us. We've seen how we affect the Arctic. So why does the Arctic affect us? Why will it control what we do and how we live? Well, we've just heard of one effect, and that is sea level. But let's look at some other processes too. There's an important word that you should learn, which is called albedo. And that means reflectivity, reflectiveness. And the Arctic has been very reflective. It's bounced back the sun's rays into the atmosphere and kept planet Earth cool for 100,000 years or more. How has it done that? Well, it has shiny surfaces. You see shiny surfaces here of the snow, and you see a shiny surface here of snow, and that bounces heat back and cools the planet. When that snow is thawing, and I showed you how that's happening, then we have bare ground or we have vegetation, and that absorbs heat. So the whole area gets warmer. This is another word for you called a feedback. And this is a positive feedback because the warming causes the snow to go. When the snow goes, more heat is absorbed, so it gets warmer still. And when it gets warmer still, then even more snow goes. And you set up what we call a feedback loop. Here, when the dark vegetation of the boreal forest trees come into the tundra, they absorb about 10%. They reflect only 10% of radiation and absorb about 80 to 90%. So these trees absorb a lot of heat, whereas the snow that they're replacing reflects most of the heat. Remember the pollution I told you about. This is what Arctic snow and ice can look like due to pollution. This is all pollution. And some of it is local, some of it is dust blown off rocks, but some of it is also soot coming from industries in the rest of the world. Because we're losing our sea ice, then there's less sea ice to reflect heat back into the atmosphere. So the top 1 meter of the sea, which is open because of the permafrost, because the sea ice is thawing, the top 1 meter holds about 80% of the heat that falls onto this area. So the water is getting warmer. And when water gets warmer, it expands. That's why sea level rises. The impurities in snow from southern industries doesn't just stay there. It also contributes to microbes growing because there's something for them to live on. So snow can be very different colors. And here you see 3 different colors of snow, all through different types of microbes. Here are the microbes that are living on these surfaces, which have more water and more nutrients to live on. Another aspect of why and how the Arctic is affecting us is through the greenhouse gases that are released from the Arctic. Now, I hope you all know what the greenhouse gases are, and that climate change is caused through greenhouse gases. And two very important ones are carbon dioxide, CO2, and methane, CH4. And the emissions of these two greenhouse gases are increasing because there are huge stores of carbon in the Arctic. There are stores of carbon in the waters, and they release methane, and this is what happens to methane coming off from a lake covered by ice in winter. There's so much that you can just set it on fire. This is the carbon in soils. As we go down the soil here into the riverbank, some of this carbon can be tens of thousands of years old. It's been stored safely in the Arctic until now because it's been so cold. But now it's getting warmer. That carbon is going into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And we measure that amount of carbon by using equipment like this in the Arctic. And we know that the carbon being released from these soils is increasing as they get warmer. And of course, once that carbon is in the atmosphere as the greenhouse gas, then the whole planet gets warmer, not just the Arctic. The last thing I want to talk about is that what happens in the Arctic has big impacts on the Arctic people, on the Arctic animals and plants and the Arctic landscapes through physical and biological processes that I've described for you. But these also can lead to disputes between countries, and we call those disputes and agreements geopolitics. Some of them are bad, some of them are good. We have to face the fact that there will be tens of thousands of people, like these Syrian refugees who are moving from their home because of bad situations at home. In the future, there will be people moving from their areas because of climate warming, because they can't grow food anymore. And we have to understand that what is happening in the Arctic to our climate is going to put pressure on people that live in hot desert areas. They will need to move. The people who are going to lose their homes because of sea level rise, they too will have to move. So we have to be prepared for a good geopolitical situation in the future. There are, fortunately, some good examples of collaboration. And here you see an exercise with ships of many different Arctic nations working together to help to prevent problems at sea and improve their ability to rescue people on ships if any ships should be sunk in the future. So we have very good collaboration in the Arctic, and we need to improve on that to plan for what will happen when more people need to move around our world. What can we do better to protect our planet? Well, we should travel less, and particularly with travel modes that use petrol and diesel. But not only that, industries need to move products less. Here is a bottle of water, and that bottle of water was produced in France, and it's exported to Spitsbergen in the high Arctic, which has unlimited amounts of fresh water and very pure water. So we are moving products all over the world totally unnecessarily, and all that takes energy and releases greenhouse gases when we transport the products. We need to waste less food, and everything that we use, we need to waste less, because when we produce those materials, we are using fossil fuels. We also need to find alternatives to plastics. This is happening, of course, but it's not happening fast enough. We need to reduce the impacts of plastics on wildlife. Here, this is not from the Arctic, of course, but it shows what the plastic from a six-pack does to a poor turtle. We need to recycle more to, again, reduce the carbon that goes into producing our food and our products. We need to protect and plant green areas to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere so it can be stored more safely and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And we need to collaborate. We need to understand that these problems are much bigger than one country. all countries will suffer in one way or another. And we need to work together to have a plan for how we manage our planet in the future. And I've just given you one example of really good collaboration with people from around the world. And this is a photo from one of the very first meetings of the very first Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this is a meeting from London, near London, in about 1988 and 89. And then you can look at my white hair now and look at my black hair in those days. We need to move forward together. And if we think about a vision statement, then perhaps one vision statement is, we want to achieve a world where Arctic ice and snow no longer melts as a result of our activities. You can all do something, you can all make a pledge. So one example of the pledge you can make is to take at least 2 small actions to reduce your impact on the planet every week until at least the next COP26 takes place. And then, of course, we want to influence the world leaders, and a call for the world leaders would be to set more ambitious climate targets. They have to understand that a limit of 1.5 degrees, although it's not enough for the whole world, that is totally impractical for other areas like the Arctic that is already warming much, much more than 1.5 degrees. So finally, thank you very much for your attention. I acknowledge a lot of people who kindly gave me their photos. I didn't manage to get names of everyone, but I thank them, those people, nevertheless. And I wish you luck in the future. I hope that you will be more concerned about how you treat this fantastic environment we have, how you can protect the Arctic, and also how you can protect the areas where you live. Good luck in the future.